Rabbi.
Baruch Hashem. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Truma is Perek Yud Aleph. We're going to be concluding the final Mishnah Halacha Hey today, leading up already to the Siyum. And we're learning Daf Kuf Hey. We are in the middle of the Mishnah, but we're starting on Daf Kuf Hey, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud. Now, just a few words of introduction to the following rules that we will learn now in the Mishnah. And that is, even though Truma, as we keep on learning throughout this Masechta, is only forbidden to be consumed by a non-Kohen, but Truma is muter b'hana'ah to a non-Kohen. Nevertheless, the hana'ah of kilui, which means that if the benefit that's coming from the Truma, it's coming in a way where the Truma itself is getting destroyed, like when you burn it into fuel. So there we learned that a Yisrael is not allowed to have benefit. So Truma Tameya that actually is going to be used as fuel, that's something that a Kohen has to benefit from. And up until this Mishnah, we understood, and a Yisrael may not. What we're going to learn in our Mishnah is something very interesting, that the Isur of a Yisrael having Hana'ah from the Kilui of the Truma is only if the Kilui is happening exclusively for a Yisrael or for Yisraelim / Zorim. But if the Kilui is happening for a Kohen, think about lighting a candle. So if a candle is being lit for a Kohen, since a Kohen is having Hana'ah, there is absolutely no problem for a Yisrael to have Hana'ah at the same time with the Kohen. Furthermore, as we'll develop the Mishnah later in the Gemara today, some, at least the way we will learn the Gemara, some are of the understanding that the Isur of having Hana'as Kilui of Truma to a non-Kohen is only Midrabanan. And therefore, perhaps, when the kilui is happening for the public, like lighting up candles in a shul, the Chachamim waived that prohibition. Or, since Kohanim frequent a shul as well, this is going to be the big one rule that we're going to learn today in many different formulations. Doesn't bother me that a Yisrael will also have Hana'ah. Because as long as it's not being done only for a non-Kohen, this is unique. By other Isuri Hana'ah, we don't go with that approach. But we are really limiting today on a little bit or a lot the problem for a Yisrael to have benefit when the Kohen is when the Truma Tamei is being consumed for a Kohen. Now the Gemara, we're going to learn a lot of Gavaldik Mishnah that sometimes we'll learn it when we learn it inside. Is there a fear that even though there are Kohanim in one environment, and therefore even Yisraelim can benefit from the warmth or the light, maybe someone will move the candle to another environment in the same home, and in that other environment maybe a Kohen won't be there. Like this type of chashash, we're going to see a four-way machlokes in the Mishnah. We're going to begin the Gemara going back to the part of the Mishnah that we learned yesterday, which was also fascinating, that the issue of animals consuming truma, I want to review this right now. Aleph, if something is designated as truma as a rule, that may not be consumed by an animal, even of a kohen. Another rule, food that's classified as animals' food doesn't have to be tithed, so therefore it's very difficult for you to find truma that's animal fodder. Doesn't go to, if it's animal fodder, it doesn't have to be tithed. And if the owner was ignorant and he said this is truma, it doesn't do anything. But there are exceptions. In the Mishnah, we learned one exception. Today we'll have a brisa that will add, according to some Tanoim, another exception. The exception we had in the Mishnah is about karshinim. Karshinim is translated in English as some sort of bitter veg. It's a food that generally is only consumed by animals, but if there is a dire need for food, like during a famine, people eat it. The Chachamim therefore said that karshinim always have to be tithed. And here's the Gavaldika part. Since normally it's only eaten by animals, so if you have karshine truma, they are allowed to be fed to animals, but here the animals have to belong to a kohen. And the words that we will use throughout the Gemara, we already said it yesterday, are words that we have in Parshas Emor, that kinyan kaspoi of the kohen is allowed to eat truma. Normally that refers to slaves that are owned by the kohen. But here we are also including in that an animal. So now comes the issue of ownership. And what we learned in the Mishnah, I'm going to go straight to the part of the Gemara today. The exception is that if a Yisrael is renting or borrowing an animal of a kohen, even though the rule normally is that the animal is kinyan kaspa of the owner. But if when the Yisrael borrowed or rented the animal, he had the animal evaluated, animal is worth, let's say, $100, and the renter or the borrower committed that when I will return this animal, either the animal will be worth $100, or if the animal gets devaluated for whatever reason, even for reasons that a renter or a borrower are not responsible for, they will compensate the owner to make up the $100. When there is such an agreement in place, here we do view the borrower or the renter during the time of the loan or of the rental as the owner of the animal. So if a Yisrael borrowed the animal of a kohen and he made this shuma, we're going to use the word shuma for what we just explained, then the Yisrael is considered the owner and he may not feed it karshine truma. And the same will be vice versa. This is going to be something that the Gemara is going to go into a bit. And somehow from here, we're going to get into the topic of Bikar Chaylim, which will be a couple of lines, but that's normally the Agadata that we get, even though we're not complaining. We did have a lot of Agadata in Mesechtes Trumais. There's going to be more details about this Yisrael benefiting from Truma Tameya while it's being used as fuel, because somehow it's related to also a kohen benefiting, and we're going to start learning at least a Braisa today that's going to stretch it, and we'll begin to realize how sometimes once you start opening things up, almost ein lo davar soif. We know this from our lives as well, but let's go right inside, Chaver Daf Kufei Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amid, the middle of the mission. Okay, Aviv. Two things. Number one, Truma is only Asur Ba'achila. It's not an Isur Hana. But if the Hana is coming while the Truma is getting used up, like being burnt up, that's called Hana Shel Kilui. Kilui means destroyed in this context. That is prohibited for a Yisrael to derive benefit from. Now, normally Truma is not allowed to be burnt up, but if Truma is Tameh, it's going to be burnt up. But who should benefit from it? A kohen, not a Yisrael. However, says the Mishnah, I want you to know, Madlikin Shemen Sreifa, the word Shemen Sreifa is another way of describing Truma Tameya. Since it's Tameh, it can't be eaten. So therefore, it's burnt, either for heat or for light. So you are allowed to use oil, Shemen, that's Tameh. Where? B'batei knesiyos, in houses of prayer or synagogues, ubebate midrashes, locations, halls designated for both study and prayer. Now, I'm going to tell you the pshat now, and then we'll see in the Gemara another way of looking at it. Who comes to a shul? Not only Yisraelim, everyone. So since we can presume that the Beis HaKnesses, the Beis HaMedrash, will have a kohen, that's the chiddush of the Mishnah. The kohen is allowed to derive benefit, so we have no problem with the Yisrael deriving benefit at the same time. Third, which is giving you four cases: Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash. Number three, ubimavo'es afelim, in dark alleyways. You know, today you have street lamps, then they would have street lamps, but they would put fuel in it. Same thing. Who goes on the streets? Everyone. Also kohanim. That's the way we're learning the Mishnah right now. Right? Remember, guys, the Gemara is going to have a new way of understanding these three. The fourth, vadai, it's connected to a kohen. Va'al
His
gabi
wife or?
hacholim b'reshus
Sorry.
kohen. Here the Mishnah says, "Va'al gabi hacholim." Now, al gabi hacholim. I know that we learned maybe in Masechta Brachas the benefit of a sick person not dwelling in darkness. I think when a person is sick, they're depressed. Darkness leads to depression. So they would light up the room for the cholim. There was another whole way of understanding this cholim with light, adarabba, that even though the sick person would like to be in darkness, would like to be rest, but since there's a mitzvah of bikkur cholim, I'm saying this now, I'm going to learn the Gemara a different way. But what I'm saying now was already over here in the Noise Kalim. So in order to make the environment of a cholim more inviting for people to do the mitzvah of bikkur cholim, so you light it up. Remember when I came to visit my father, Mamash, at the end of his life, he was in the hospital, and the shade was open, and people were in there, and it was noisy. First thing I walked in there, I did is I kicked everyone out. I was upset. He was Mamash. He had pancreatic cancer. He was a half in, half out. I lowered the shade, and an old friend of his walked in over there, and he told me, "What are you doing?" I said, "My father needs to rest." He says, "You like quiet. You like dark." He says, "Your father loves the noise and the light." He says, "Don't do what you want." He opened up the shade. He called everyone back in, and he was so right. So anyways, I don't know who needs the light. Someone needs the light. I don't know, the chayla or the person that thinks he's healthy. Now, that is allowed to be done. Here we go. This b'reshus kohen. B'reshus kohen doesn't mean b'reshus kohen the way you normally say. It means when the kohen is present. That's key. That the kohen has to be present by the cholim. Vadai. Does a kohen have to be present in the Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash, b'mevo'os, ha'feilos? In the Gemara, there'll be a shita that will hold that since the Isur of a Yisrael having a from the kilui of Truma Tameya is only midrabanan, when there is a public need would mean either on the streets or in a Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash. So either or. In other words, we're learning exceptions where Yisraelim will derive benefit. By the Cholim Vadai B'Reshus, you have to have a kohen present. Now, another case, we're going to stretch it. The Mishnah stretches it, the Braisa will stretch it more. The Braisa will be at the end of today's daf. Bas Yisrael Sheniseis L'Kohen. So imagine, Avid, one day you'll be married, one day you'll have children. Maybe God will bless you with a daughter. Maybe you'll have Rabbi Chen, you'll have sons. But you might have a son and a daughter. You might have daughters, whichever God gives us. And now, the daughter that married the kohen, she's allowed to derive benefit from Truma Tameya. The father, who's a Yisrael, somehow has Truma Tameya. The Gemara is going to ask how. That will be very important. But really, the father has it. So the Mishnah is saying a chiddush that if vihi limudas lavai eitzel avia, if she frequents her father's home, she has a relation, she visits him, the father is allowed to light in his house the oil of Truma Tameya prior to her being there, because she's going to be there. Avia madlik b'reshusa. Listen, my friends, b'reshusa doesn't mean while she's present, even though by the choila, a kohen has to be present. The Gemara is going to stretch that as well. Since she is going to be coming, I'm going to use these words, shortly before her arrival, he's already allowed to use that shemen. So now we're saying a bigger chiddush. No, it's since she's coming, he can light it. He can even light it right before she comes. Maybe he has to hear the car coming. Yeah.
I have to ask something.
Yes.
The Gemara in Shabbos,
yes.
I don't remember who said B'Shem Serefa.
Sure.
He's not excluding all these cases. B'Shem Serefa.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. If that means that if you a Yisrael, how would a Yisrael b'chlal have Truma Tameya? So how would that happen? Truma has to be given to a kohen. So hold on a second. The Mishnah is saying over there that if a kohen wants to use shemen sreifa for, I know that, but I'm saying the Mishnah over there, not for all of us. We can take a Gemara Shabbos here and we'll find this.
Can she also be in shul in his place?
One more time.
Can she, the daughter, be in shul in his place?
Being shul? What do you mean by that?
Right. You said you can have a candle. You can have the fire for the community. He leaves. Can she stay in shul and keep the fire there?
Well, we're going to get back to that in the Gemara cave. And one opinion holds that we don't even need a coin in a shul. We don't even need a coin in a shul. Ad kedei kach. Another case. Madlikin bebeis hamishta, avoloi bebeis ha'evel. Now, guys, let's go to the Marafulda, and we're going to go through the Marafulda over here. Beginning, 3 lines from the top. There's a 4-way machlokes tanoim here. So we're learning now the first opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. What does it mean you can light Shem and Sreifa bebeis hamishta? Why yeah, why not? So just you have to get the background. You have in a hall where there's a wedding, even then, there isn't only one room. It doesn't work that way. You have the Kabbalah's Panim room, you have the Kala's room, you have the Chuppah area, you have many different rooms. So what's the fear? Let's go with the pshat of the Mishnah. All right, Kevin, let's put aside public need. Let's go that since a kohen is present, even a Yisrael can derive benefit. So you have a Beis HaMishta, a kohen is present, you have 100 people, there's one kohen, 2 kahanim, who cares how many? You have kohen. So you would think you can light a candle. But maybe there's a fear. What's the fear? Once you have candles lit, maybe someone will need to go to another room, will take one of those lamps that has oil, truma, to the other room, and maybe in the other room there won't be a kohen. Do we have to have such a chashash? That's the way we're going to learn the whole Mishnah. And there's 4 opinions. First opinion is, let's read in the Marafulda. You are allowed to light madlik in the Beis HaMishta. Why? Since people dafke at a wedding, they go with their nicer clothing, moving lamps then open the chances for people to soil their clothing with a little bit of oil, with a little bit of wax. We can relate to that. And therefore, you're clear. What's the way he learns the Mishnah? In contrast, says the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, avoloi bebeis ha'evel. But beis ha'evel, people dafka don't dress up to a beis ha'evel. So even though in a house of mourning, again, we're speaking about someone's home there's not one big room like a beis haknesses. There are many rooms. So even though in the area designated for the prayer bebeis ha'avel, again, we're going with the presumption there's a kohen there, but there's a chashash that maybe someone is going to take one of the candles. He won't know that they're Shem and Tamei. He's going to go to another room, bebeis ha'avel. In the other room, there won't be a kohen. No one is afraid to move candles because anyways, you're dressed down. That's what the Marafulda says. You're going begodim tsoyim. Because of that chashash, the Chazal said, don't use Shem at all. Shem and Tamei at all. Divid Rabbi Yehuda. It's amazing. Rabbi Yossi says, punkt fakert. You are allowed to use, look at this, you are allowed to use Shemen Tamei or Shemen Sreifa, bebeis ha'evel, but not in the Beis HaMishta. What's his opposite logic? I'm 9 lines from the top in the Marafulda. Rabbi Yossi. See, here you see Rabbi Yehuda is the Rosh HaMedabrim. Here you see, Rabbi Yehuda comes first. Now, what does Rabbi Yossi say? Bebeis ha'evel. Why? Mitoich sheliba nishbar v'nichna. When people are feeling the pain, they are more sensitive to keeping what God wants when people are in a painful environment. That logic. So everyone knows, since everyone knows that in these public places they would use also Shem and Sreifa, let's go with the simple pshat because Kohanim are there as well. So, and people behave more. I can tell you, in the most, let's say, observant or religious environment in where we segregate the genders with mechitzas, even there in a Beis ha'avel, of course we don't daven in the same room. We're not so cautious. We learned about this in Masechtas Tainis. That's because that's how it works. In a cemetery, bechlal, people are not because the same concept. Because shaliba nishbar v'nichna, there's a lesser koyach of the Yetzer Hara there in that environment, and the opposite. V'loi bebeis hamishta. Why not? Weiter in the Marafulda, shehem simechem. Because when people are joyful, in a place of joy, the whole fasting of Bahab twice a year after Pesach and after Tishrei is because of this. Yeah, people are besimchan. Maybe some rules got broken. Now, Rab Meir, oiser kan v'kan, and Rab Shimon, mater kan v'kan. Now, guys, we're going to further expound on this four-way machlokes in the Gemara. So we had really in the Mishnah, we had two different topics. We had the topic that we learned yesterday, kinyanim. We had the topic of today, and then it branched into the four-way machlokes. So we're going to go and focus on what we learned yesterday at the Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis in the beginning of the Mishnah. And like the whole Mishnah is based on many different rules. The rule that truma cannot be fed. B'chlal, truma should not be fed to animals. But truma that is allowed to be fed to animals, like kashine, the bitter veg, it can only be fed to an animal of a kohen. Like, where do we get all these things? So says the Gemara, and then the other thing, that even though, it's like so many steps, when I rent something, there is a certain level of achrayas that I have, but I'm not the owner for the dinim of truma. But if there was a shuma, which means an appraisal, and the purpose of making an appraisal, either prior to renting or prior to borrowing, was because the one who's renting or borrowing is committing himself or herself that I'm taking something of $100 value, I will give you back $100 value, even if what happened is not something for which I'm a chayiv and achrayis. That means I have full responsibility. Here we consider the person during the borrowing, during the renting, not la'olam vod, we consider them owners enough that it's considered their kinyan kaspai. Where do we get all these things from? That's the Umar's kasha. Minayin leparasi shel koyin, shehoisa shuma etzel Yisrael, that was loaned, but prior to loaning, they made an appraisal because the borrower is saying, I'm giving you back its value no matter what. That you have to read, you have to get the right version. So we're saying that since the borrower is fully responsible, then he's she'enoi machila truma. So it's no longer the animal of a kohen. So he cannot feed it truma. How do you know that? So Talmud Loimer, guys, it's good. We have whoever has a Torah or Shalom. This is a pasuk in Parshas Emer to read the whole pasuk. The pasuk reads, "For kohen ki yikne nefesh kinyan kaspoy." A kohen who acquires a nefesh, acquiring, the pshat would be a slave. We're going to see in today's Gemara that the word nefesh also includes the animal kingdom, kinyan nefesh. So now it's kinyan kaspoy. Hu yoichal boy, the slave, the animal, which is now the kinyan kaspoy, it's the acquisition of. The kohen is allowed to eat truma, and the yelid beisoi, heim yoichlu belachmoi. Okay. So kohen ki yikne nefesh kinyan kaspoy. So since the Torah says kinyan kaspoy, and now that you have this man who made the shuma, the one who made the shuma, since he's chayiv even for oines, and I know, guys, that normally by borrowing, we remember generally a borrower is chayiv almost for everything, but not for everything. If when he borrowed the item, the owner was also borrowed to him, he won't be chayiv to pay. Mesa machmas malacha, he won't be chayiv to pay. If the animal got devalued because the pricing of the commodity of animals went down. I took a cow, I gave you back a cow. Here, this is a person that's mamish, completely chayiv, so it's a logic. That's the way we'll understand it. It's a svara that he's considered to be the owner. Okay. Now the Gemara quotes a brais. And the words that we just quoted was that heim yoichlu belachmoi, right? V'yelid beisoi, heim yoichlu belachmoi. The word heim is extra. That's the way we'll learn. V'yelid beisoi, yoichlu belachmoi. It would work. What's the heim? Zes the braisa. Yochel loy yachi leno bekarshinim. First of all, you would think that what? That since truma, which is normally only human food, animal food doesn't have to be tithed. Human food is not allowed to be given to animals. Human food, that's truma. That's truma. How do you know that you can give karshinim to the animals? So Talmud loymar, 1 second. So Talmud loymar, how do you know that even animals can eat truma? What do you know that animals can eat truma? When you read the pasuk that we just read, the koyin ki yikna nefesh kinyan kaspoy, I would say nefesh kinyan kaspoy. We're speaking about a slave. I got it, a real slave, not a evet kanani of a koyin can eat truma. How do you know it includes animal? So the Braisa says from the word nefesh. And you should know that there's a pasuk in the end of the same parsha. Umake nefesh behema yishalmeno. Even though nefesh means a person, normally nefesh means a person. Nefesh means a composite of a soul in a human body. A nefesh. Sometimes nefesh refers to a living animal. So here you go. So the nefesh is part of the kinyan kaspai. Now, says the Gemara, we know from our Mishnah, there's only one item that is allowed to be fed to animals. Truma, being allowed to be fed to animals of a kohen, karshinim, because it's like nishtahen, nishtahin. If it would be human food, it would never be truma. If it would be animal food, if it would be human food, you can't feed it to animals. If it would be animal food, you can't make it into truma. We learned about karshinim. So says the Gemara that there is tanoi. Some of the tanoim, when they learned this din, they added another item. With tilson. Interestingly, according to this brisa, fenugreek. I know there's a supplement. People have fenugreek. According to a brisa, is even though this brisa holds it's considered primarily animal food, but since sometimes people eat it, it falls into this category. You have to tithe it, but you can feed it to animals. Says the Gemara that we reject this opinion. Rabbi Chizkiya and Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Chiya b'shem Rabbi Yechanan leis kan tilson can be. There was a corruption in this brisa because tilson devar Torah is considered to be food fed to humans. Okay, weiter. Now, same thing in the opposite direction. The Mishnah said that if you have a kohen who is the borrower or the renter, the owner is the Yisrael. If a kohen, prior to borrowing, prior to renting, appraises the animal and commits to give the owner, the Yisrael, back full value during the time of the borrowing or of the renting, the kohen is considered the owner, and the kohen is allowed to feed the animal karshine truma. Now here there's a problem. Not being allowed, I get. Being allowed, l'chu'ura should demand for the kohen to be fully the owner. I'm asking you, is the kohen fully the owner? He's not fully the owner. How do I know he's not fully the owner? He can't keep the animal. What happens if they made an appraisal and the animal is worth $100, and at the end of the time of the borrowing, the kohen, the borrower says, you know what? I'm chayiv to give you back full value. Take $100. The owner can say, I'd never agreed to sell the animal to you. It's not fully the kohen's. So why shouldn't a little bit of ownership of a Yisrael should disallow the kohen to feed these karshidim? That's the Gemara's kasha. The kohen shesham part of Yisrael, fragt the Gemara, loy kein tani, did we not learn it about Brisa? Minayin lekohen shekavad eved Yisrael by shutvois. How do you know? Let's go to the case of a slave, that if a kohen bought a slave, but there is a Yisrael that has a small partnership. You know what a small partnership would mean? Afilu echad mimeya boy, even 1/100th. You own something, you make shares, and he has 1 share of 100 shares. But, says the Braisa that little ownership is enough for the kohen not to be allowed to feed to the Evet Truma. She'ena machile Truma. How do we know that? Because it says v'kohen ki yikna. And the word yikna means he has to own it. Acquisition. So the Gemara's kasha is, it's like a logical kasha. Like I said, since the kohen cannot keep the animal and pay the Yisrael, even though he's responsible to pay the value, how can you say that he's the full owner? That's the Gemara's kasha. And the Gemara doesn't answer. The Gemara actually sides with this logic. And the Gemara found a Braisa that argues with our Mishnah. And indeed, that's the ending of this Amid. That Tanei bar kapare fakert. That's a Braisa. That's Tanoim. Echadzu ve'echadzu. Even if there was a Shuma in either direction. In the other direction, it makes sense. In other words, if the kohen is the owner, since the Yisrael made a Shuma, so he's considered a part owner. So he ruins it. But in the other direction, it's not full ownership. Neither direction, loy soichel betruma. That's gavaldig. So Bar Kapara's Braisa argues with the Tana of our Mishnah. And that concludes the topic of ownership. Just to mention one thing good to know, and that is that the way we define ownership, the Torah's criteria is different in every area of halacha. I think in a practical area is Pesach, if one owns chametz, they're oiven and bal yirah, bal yamatzah. When you go to a hotel on Pesach and they have a frigo bar that has normally chametz in it, whether it's vodka, mashke, or whether they have crackers or cookies, since if it's going to be lost, the renter is going to be chayiv to pay. That's what happens. Even though it didn't get lost, midai raisa, the person is violating bal yirah, bal yamatz. So, in other words, there, a little bit of achrayis makes you the owner. Here, we're saying that if you're not fully, according to Bar Kapar, if you're not fully the owner, it's not yours. The way we define ownership is not consistent in every area of halacha. You have a different criteria. Just to make that clear. Okay. And this is the topic that we began today's share with. Again, when we learned the Mishnah, the simple pshat of learning the Mishnah gave 4 cases that you have Shemen Sreifa. Shemen Sreifa means Truma Tameya. So the Mishnah says you are allowed to light it bebate knesiyos, ubebate midrashos, ubemivuos afelos in dark alleyways, and when there's a chayla al gaba chayla b'reshus kohen. Question is, does the b'reshus kohen go on all 4? Is it that you are allowed to use Shemen Sreifa in all of these 4 environments because kahanim are there? Or where do you need to have the presence of a kohen? Only by the chayla. But on the first 3, but Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash, and in alleyways, as we'll see, since it's servicing the public, and we are learning that the isur of a non-kohen having hana'ah shel kilu is only midrabanan. There is an opinion that holds that the Rabbanan waived their prohibition when there is a public need. Let's read it inside. So madlikin Shemen Sreifa b'batim mesiyas b'batim midrashos. Zakti Gemara Shimon Barva says in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Kain he masnisa. This is the right way of learning the Mishnah. That what? That the al gabi choylem b'reshus kohen. Only link the b'reshus kohen, which means here kohen's presence, only by the case of a choylem. We don't need a kohen in the Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash. Ha masnisa kadmaisa, but the prior 3 cases, Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash, and the alleyways, afilu shaloi b'reshus kohen. So learns Rabbi Yechanan, which is gavaldik. Says the Gemara, Tani Rab Chia, now that we made the statement, bikur hachoyle ein lo shir. So many different ways of learning the Gemara. We're going to learn it now, the way the Penei Moshe will learn it, which means no limit would mean that when you visit the sick, it's not like you don't have a mitzvah. I'm not talking about obligation, but let's speak about, is there a mitzvah for you to come back to him? Do we say you visited him? You fulfilled the mitzvah. It's done. If you go back to him, you get the mitzvah again. If you go back to him, you get the mitzvah again. Obviously, if he wants. That's a biggie. And therefore, we can make a presumption that even if a kohen visited the chayla before, even though the kohen is not in the room right now, we're presuming that a kohen is going to come. Notice what we're going to start doing from here until the bottom of Hasli, as far we can get, is first of all put Rabbi Yechanan aside. Okay, Rabbi Yechanan is being mechadesh. Public need, you don't even need a kohen. Not public need, a chayla is not called a public need. You need to have a kohen. What we're going to start doing is to show is that you actually don't need a kohen present. That's the way we're going to learn pshat. How do you know that bikar hachoyle ein lo shiur? Even though you visited the sick, there's a mitzvah for you to come back. You know it from our Mishnah. Amar Rab Chia barado masnis amar kain. Our Mishnah implies that since the Mishnah says va'al gabi hachoylem b'reshus kohen, and the word b'reshus kohen doesn't mean that the kohen is present. It means that we make an educated guess that there will be a kohen. And even if there was already the kohen, we're living in a village, there's only one kohen. The kohen came already. The kohen is going to come back because bikar chaylim ein lo shir. Let's read it inside the Pnei Moshe. Pnei Moshe is around 7 lines. At the end of the second narrow line from the top of the Amid. Val gabi hachoylim b'reshus kohen uchshe'ein sham kohen loy. But if the kohen is not there, no. Umishum shederech bikur chaylim zeh nichnas v'zeh yoytze v'hakohen hamavakir hoylech v'shav. Okay, Shusham Madlik, and I take it, he has to be there. So wait for him to come back. But a Shus Kohen means the Kohen has to be there. But it's understood from over here that wait a little bit for the Kohen to be there because the Kohen, and the Kohen is going to come back. because of the mitzvah of Bikkur Chaylim. There are many, many different ways of learning this Mishnah, but we'll leave it at that. Okay. In other words, what Pnei Moshe says in the next piece is that don't think that just like Rabbi Yochanan, they were lenient l'tzoyrech rabim, they would be lenient l'tzoyrech hachaylam. No. They were only lenient because since Bikkur Chaylim ain't Lashir, and therefore Kahanim are coming, people are coming and going, so wait for the coin to be there, but the coin has to be there.
More matzah to it, but it's going to be in the basement but they can see rather than
Correct. Well, unless you're living in a community where there's no coin, which I don't think would be so unusual. I'm saying we are big city boys, but in the shtetl, if there weren't kahanim, what do? I'm sure there were scenarios where there was no coin. And every shtetl had a Beis HaMedrash, Beis HaKnesses. There are many minyanim that don't have a coin. There's such a thing. Coin is a big deal. Okay. Now the Mishnah. So here we go. So Kevin is that if the fire goes out and no coin is present, can Yisrael light it up? Absolutely not. Not the way we're going to learn it. Okay, let Rabbi Yochanan in the Beis HaKnesses, yeah. Because you don't need him b'chlal to be there. But if you need a coin, you have to wait for him to come back. Now the Mishnah spoke about a Yisrael whose daughter married a coin, and the father is allowed to light Shemen Sreifa right before his daughter is coming, even though she's not in the room. That's the meaning. That's the way we're learning the Mishnah. The Gemara wants to know what type of Shemen Sreifa is the father, the Yisrael, lighting. And there are two ways of learning the Mishnah. First of all, you should know that there are times that a Yisrael is the owner of Truma. The example that Chazal always give is that a Kohen can have daughters. It's shaykh for a Kohen to have grandsons, Yisraelim, if his daughter married a Yisrael. And if a Kohen who owns stuff passed away, in the case, as an example, he has only daughters, so they're Yarshin. So his stuff will go down to Yisraelim. So first of all, the Mishnah for sure can be speaking about a scenario that the Yisrael owns Shemen Sreifa. It's his. That means it was already given to a Kohen. Then he Yarshin it from a Kohen. Since this guy's daughter married a Kohen, he can light it for the daughter. He can also derive benefit from it. Maybe the Mishnah is even speaking about a Yisrael who separated oil to give to a Kohen. He never gave it to a Kohen. It became Tameh. Are you allowed to use even that Truma instead of giving it to the Kohen, but by lighting it for the Kohen and now deriving benefit? That's the question. In other words, are we going to extend this heter to almost figure out how Yisrael won't actually end up giving the shemen to a Kohen? Now, how would you do that? How would that be okay? The Gemara is going to explain how that might be okay. Ultimately, it's a machlokes. Two on this side, two on that side. Let's read it inside.
But isn't it like the same case as like the giving like the food to the animal?
Very good. And we learned in Rashi, we learned in the Marafulda, this whole word, that it's as if you gave it to the Kohen, and the Kohen wants you to give it to the animal because you're going to give it plentifully. We're going to have to find a way of how it works. Or you can't just give it to the animal. We have to understand it. It's as if you gave it to the Kohen, and on behalf of the Kohen, you're feeding the animal, even though you're deriving benefit. Let's read it inside. Rabbi Yirmiyah boy kumi Rab Zeiram at kedoin will mean vadai for sure. Of course, the case of the Mishnah works. Betruma shenat loloi mi beis avi imay kohen, that the Yisrael whose daughter married a kohen, who wants to use shemen sreifa for his daughter and chaparain and also benefit from it. For sure, he's allowed to use shemen sreifa that was already given to the kohen, and now it belongs to him. In other words, there's no issue of it has to be given to a kohen. It was given to a kohen. The only issue is, can a Yisrael derive benefit? And the answer is yeah. If a kohen is deriving benefit, he also can benefit as well. The question that he asked, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked is, Va'afilu betrumas garnoi, would we even say it if a Yisrael has a goyden? That means he never gave it to the kohen yet. In this case, he had oil, and he never gave it to a kohen. The oil became tamei. He never gave it to a kohen yet. He happens to have a daughter that married a kohen. Is he even allowed to use that Or let's go, not Rabbi Yochanan, that in the Beis HaKnesses you can use Shem and Sreifa because Kahanim are in the Beis HaKnesses. So if a guy has Shem and Sreifa, he didn't give it yet, is he allowed to donate it to the synagogue? And claiming, I'm giving it to the Kohen because the Kohen is going to, could you stretch it to that limit? So that's what he asked. So Rabbi Ze'era responded, how can you even think such a thing? For sure not. Man yemalach betrumas gardenay. Why would you even open that possibility? Vaday not. No, it's once the Kohen received the truma tmeya. I get it. The Mishnah is being machadesh while the Kohen is deriving benefits. So may a Yisrael. But you're telling me that he shouldn't even have to give it? No, there's an obligation. We have to give our truma to the Kohen. Even though he pushed back, like how can you even open that up? Nevertheless, says the Gemara that Rabbi Yoina veRabbi Yosi. That Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yosi, they both debated this very matter. Rabbi Yoina holds like Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now, does it mean that you vaday are allowed to use it, or at least he was open to that possibility? That's not clear. But he was more lenient. He was for sure open to that, to applying the Mishnah's case even prior to giving it to a Kohen. But Rabbi Yosi, like Rabbi Ze'era, says for sure not. For sure not. So now the Gemara is going to challenge Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yirmiyah's opinion. Man the Omar, the ones that hold that our Mishnah's permit is only betruma shenaflonoi mebeis avi imoy kohen. According to that understanding, nicha makes sense. Why does it make sense? That he's using it for his daughter who gave you the right? Yeah, because he owns it. Nicha, because Michal Kai Asya. But Lamanda Amar, really, it's according to the other, both of them, Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yirmiyah, that they are open, either for sure or maybe, that even Betrumas Garnoi, how can that be? How can you just use it? Don't you have to give it to a Kohen? Aside of the issue of a Yisrael deriving benefit, you have to give it to a Kohen. How can you not give it to a Kohen? Amalei, the Gemara says, I'll tell you how. You're right. Without doing anything, you can't. What must have happened was must be that the father is going to have another person lifted up on the hand of his daughter's husband.
Another person Kohen.
No. Someone has to make a kinyan on behalf of the recipient. And by the way, Aviv, the same thing will go in the Mishnah, that prior to feeding the karshinim, in the normal case of a renter, so the kohen is the owner. I'm a Yisrael, I'm renting it. I have karshinim that I never gave away yet. Before giving it to the animal that I'm allowed to, because it's king and kaspai of the owner, someone has to do an act of lifting it up on behalf of the owner. In other words, you're right. You can't skip the step of giving truma to a kohen. But there are ways of doing it. The kohen doesn't even know, doesn't matter. It's only anything that's purely to someone's benefit, and there's no downside, even without his knowledge. That's amazing. Says the Gemara Tani. Now we're going to start expanding the heter of our Mishnah. We learned in a Braisa. Yisrael v'koyin shehoyu shutafin b'chanos. You have a Yisrael and a koyin. They have a retail store. Nebuch. And now, B'malei Yisrael es haner Shem and Sreifa. This is amazing. Here we're stretching. What happens if there is a storage space that is dark? Can a Yisrael take a lamp with Shem and Sreifa, go to the storage space, bring merchandise back into the store, even though in that aliyah there's no kohen? Why would you think he's allowed to do it? Because since the kohen and the Yisrael, they are owners in the shop. So if the schayra that you're going to bring down will be sold, who benefits from it? Also the kohen. So the Braisa is going to start showing you, once you say that since a kohen is having benefit, together with the kohen you can have a Yisrael, doesn't have to be present. Great example is they're both owners together. And we're going to see that soon, Ein Lo Davar Seif. I'm going to use it for me. I'll be in a better mood. So when the kohen walks in, I'll just smile to him. Like we'll see here in the Vayla, they're partners. So because we consider the whole business as tzrachav shel kohen. But if the Yisrael, who is partnered with the kohen, has in the aliyah not merchandise that belongs to the business, he also has his own person. He has to be careful. If he's doing something that's his own personal stuff, then he's not allowed to do it. That's what the Braisa Avaloi Shel Yisrael means. If he's using it for something that's only his, you're not allowed to do it. But if he's doing anything business related, I don't even need for the coin to be present, and we are in the middle of the